Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. David asked me about this topic and I said, I think it was 2 weeks prior. And I said, David, I have so much information on this topic. I'm so happy to share with everyone. So again, thank you so much. I am Lakisha C. Brooks, Chief Learning Officer for Brooks Enterprise Consultants. Sit on a couple of advisory boards, won't bore you with that information. And I do want you guys to connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is exactly the same, Lakisha C. Brooks on LinkedIn. So hopefully I'll have about 30 to 35 new requests because I definitely love to connect with you all after this session. So what are we going to talk about? This topic is so important when we look at diversity and inclusion. And I work with a lot of organizations that talk about, hey, I want to have more people of color. I want to have women. I want to have more young people. And today we're going to talk about going beyond that. How does this align with your overall objectives? How does this align with your goals? So we want to take the idea of diversity and talk about it in a strategic business way. So that's some of the stuff that we're going to focus on today. And in addition to that, we want to have a clear definition of diversity and how that and those goals, how the goals can be built around them. In order to be able to build those goals, you have to know what diversity means, what it really means in relations to business. We are also going to talk about you having the ability to know how to communicate the business need for D&I efforts. It's not simply we want to do something warm and fuzzy and we think it's great for us. I mean, that's a great reason to do it. You say, hey, it's the moral thing to do. I think that it feels good for us to do. It's the right thing to do. And we're going to go beyond that and talk about how can you communicate that to your decision makers to be able to have the need for DE&I within your organization. And then lastly, you're going to have the ability to understand how to set benchmarks. How do you improve diversity? And again, how does that tie with your business goal? So I want you guys to take off the hat of it feels good, everyone's doing it, seems like a trend, and put on a hat of if you were someone that was a decision maker. Some of you guys are at the C-suite level. Some of you guys have the ability to make that decision. And I want us to put on that strategic thinking hat. When we're setting our goals for next year or even later in the year, put that hat on today when we think about diversity. So let's look at the definition of diversity. So according to SHRM, and I know a lot of people are HR here, the definition that they provide for us is a collective mixture of differences and similarities. And so you're thinking, well, what does that mean? This can mean anything from gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, education, national origin. It's all of these different things when we talk about diversity. And again, I want us to stretch our mind to think outside of that. I want us to think about what about ideas, diversity in concepts, differences in background as far as your education and different roles. And I'll give you an example of that. So let's say that you have a sales organization. And everyone that you hire has a sales background. What diversity means, maybe hiring someone who may have an education background, maybe hiring someone who has an ops background. That's also diversity in your organization. And I say that in the beginning because it's going to really set the playing field of how we're going to look at diversity from a strategic point of view. You will not see, I want to have 5 Black people next year. You're not going to see a goal of, I want to make sure we have 5 women. You won't see goals like that because those are not strategic goals. I'm going to tell you what those type of goals are in a second, but I really want us to understand the definition of diversity. And now I want to take it a little further. And I want to talk about the evolution of diversity in the workplace because it hasn't always been what you see today. It has transformed over the years. And I want you to think about maybe where your organization is on these models. So the first model is the compliance model. This is when an organization is satisfying things like affirmative action. We want to make sure that we're giving those disadvantaged individuals the opportunity to get a job even just because of affirmative action. That's the way that it used to be. And also, I don't want EEOC complaints. So we're going to make sure that we do that. So we want to make sure that we're compliant. That's where it used to be. And it actually is where it derived. So when we first started thinking about diversity and inclusion training back in about the 60s and 70s, it really started with making sure everyone was compliant. And then it moved into a social justice. And we hear that term a lot now, like, oh, we want to make sure that we focus on social justice. And in relations to diversity, what this means is that tokenism. You're just doing the right thing. So remember I said, we do have leaders that think it's the right thing to do. Well, I want to make sure that I have 5 Black people on my team. Well, that is a tokenism. And that illustrates that you feel it's the right thing to do. I want to help the Black community, for example. I want to help women. I want to help young people. So I'm going to actively go and hire these people so that we can say that we've done it. They can be our token young people, women, disabled people, so on and so forth. We need to move past that to thinking it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, right? Sure. But then you went into that diversity model. That's when all the elements of diversity management, they connect and they align with different approaches. And you use tools and a strategic, and you use synergy to create that model. That's where a lot of organizations are now. They're thinking about, hey, I want to think about different ways of thinking. And I want to think about all the areas of diversity as well. I don't want those 1 or 2 token people. I want to make sure we're thinking about all areas of diversity. And where you really want to be, and you're in the advanced area, which is where today's organizations should be, is in that inclusive business model. Now, what does that mean to be inclusive? That means you're thinking about all areas of your organization, the value chain of your organization, the demands of every part of your business. Remember, it's not about the people that are inside your 4 walls or remotely nowadays. It's not about just your team and your staff and your talent. It's not just about you as leadership and management. When you think about being inclusive, it's about your customers, your suppliers, your different vendors. It's everyone around you as well. And that's when you think about being an inclusive business. So you want to go from, we just want to be compliant, we want to make sure that we're doing these trainings that we have to do, to how do I figure out diversity in relations to my customer base, my diversity and my suppliers. That's where I want your mind to go when we think about diversity. And that is when we start to think about how it can be impactful for your business effectiveness as well. So one of the first things that I encourage organizations to do when they're trying to figure out, well, what do I need to do? It's like, Lakisha, you're telling me I need to be inclusive. Well, how do I know what I need to do? Because you're telling me that I can't say, or I shouldn't say, let's just get women, or let's just get this. How do I do this? So the one thing you want to do, the first thing you want to do is a diversity audit. All of my clients who say they want to do diversity initiative, I always encourage them to do an audit. Otherwise, you will fall into the trap of typically just doing typical type of stuff. We want to talk about warm and fuzzy stuff. We want to talk about making sure that we understand differences, and that's great. And how does that align with your business goals? It may not. So this is why I talk about a diversity audit, because what the audit does is it lets us see all areas of our organization. We may think as leaders, we need to go do unconscious bias training. That's what it is. People are not aware about their biases. However, once I look through all of your information in an audit, I may realize it's really the fact that you have no market share in a certain demographic. All of your customer base comes from the West Coast. That's diversity. How about now having some customer base in the South, which means that you may have to actually market differently to have customers in that area. I'm from the South. Now, we think kind of different than they do on the West Coast. So that's diversity in that relation. So I want us to, again, think about it that way. So let me give you some examples of what you can do to have a holistic diversity audit. The first thing is identifying where you are on this continuum. So this continuum shows whether or not your organization is compliant. We talked about this. This means you're doing those compliant trainings. You may have employees that are in Maine, maybe they're in California, for example, or Connecticut. They have annual sexual harassment training 2 times a year, twice a year, depending on what state you're in. And so you're like, hey, we have to do this. We're going to do it. Right? You may say, hey, we're there. And it's okay if you're there. The goal is to get you out of that. And then you want to say, okay, am I conventional? This means that I'm holding mandatory sessions on differences. Remember, I told you That's unconscious bias, for example. That means you're conventional. Everyone has to go to this annual session to understand different ideas of differences. Everyone's understanding that. And then you say, we're doing this with purpose. So you're moving towards that purposeful area in the business. This means that there's a need for it. This means that we create a business case. So it doesn't really matter if you're in like ops or if you're in HR, if you're in sales. Typically, before you can roll out any initiative, your organization, your leaders ask you to do a business case of some sort. Why do we need to do this? So when you start to get in that purposeful area, this is where you start to develop those business cases to say, this is why we need it. And then you get to that competent area. This is where you're integrating DE&I in everyday business practices. This is where you have that baseline of metrics. And the goal for every organization is to be advanced. This is where you expect some sort of results, positive, preferably, and sometimes you may not see a positive result, but it's aligning with those corporate goals. So that's why we said we want to get away from compliance. It's compliance, you have to do it. You have to go to these mandatory sexual harassment trainings. We want to go away from, we're going to do a mandatory training every year to make sure that we understand the differences in everyone in our organizations. Those are great. It's not that you don't want to do them. You want to integrate those to make sure your organization is competent or advanced. And that's when you start to say, what are my metrics? What are my benchmarks? And when you get to advanced, you're saying, I have an expectation now for a result of some sort. So that's the first thing you want to do is identify where you are. And again, be honest. Because again, you may have a coalition of people on your team that can help you, or you bring out outside consultant like myself, and we can help you move that needle as well. Another thing you can do is a focus group. So I have clients that do this, and typically I have it be a cross-functional focus group. I like to have a few leaders in there. I like to have individual contributors in there. I like to have it very diverse because we are talking about diversity, because you want to get different perspectives on this as well. 8 to 10 people is the max you want to have, even if it's a large organization. You want to make sure that those ideas are diverse. You want to make sure the departments represented are diverse, because again, we're trying to get a holistic approach to diversity within an organization. You're going to ask certain questions to the group. You want to make sure they're very specific. What is your end goal? What are you trying to get out of this? What is the message? What is the information you're trying to gather? And you ask those questions as well. You also want to make sure that they know the purpose of what we're doing here. Make sure they know that the information will stay here within the group. The last thing you want to do is have someone say, hey, I heard so-and-so said this in the focus group. So make sure you put parameters around your focus group as well. Make sure it's not too long as well, because people get burnt out, they get tired. So make sure you're setting yourself up for success and your focus group as well to gather that information. Another thing I like to do is surveys. So these surveys, you would like to send them anonymously. I like to send surveys, whether it's all through the organization. And then sometimes I'll send surveys that are just for departments, because you get a good gauge of stuff. For instance, you may see that ops, HR, sales, C-suite, everyone has a different perspective on diversity. And you can use that information to say, okay, where do we really need to go with our goals and our strategy? So you can do it that way, but it's best to make sure it's anonymous. No matter what the department, maybe you just identify the department, but it's a good way to gauge information as well. You want to consider the length, just like the timing with the focus group, and the delivery method as well. Just having a simple email sent out with the link, but celebrate this as well and let everyone know, hey, we're going to do a survey. We really want to hear from you all, because you want to make sure you have a nice percentage of people returning the surveys. I mean, if you get 100%, you are a rock star, because that does not happen. So you want to set that benchmark. This is all about metrics and benchmarks. So your organization may look at your surveys over the past 3 years and say, anytime we do a company-wide survey, employee experience, employee engagement, anything like that, we're realizing that we have a 25% return completion rate. So we want to make sure that we stay in that as well. So we want to say, we want to kind of up that a little bit more, because we're going to use this information to determine our strategic goals for diversity. You may say, well, we're usually at this amount. Let's go 30%. That's our goal for that. And put things in place, put a plan in place so that you can effectively hit that number as well. I love this one, records assessment. It can be lengthy, but I love it. So what I like to do is I have organizations pull me records between the last 2 to 5 years, depending on what the project is, depending on what we're trying to gather. So it could be customer demographics. So let me see over the past 2 years what your customer demographics look like. What are their buying behaviors? Where are they from? What are they buying? Are they just buying one type of thing? I like to see that kind of stuff. Let's look at some of your recruiting over that time period as well. How are you recruiting? Are you recruiting the same way? So you're telling me you don't have diverse talent, but then I look at your records over the last 3 years and you're literally recruiting the same places at the same time, the same way. Well, there's no diversity in that. That's why you're getting the same type of candidates. Also hiring. Who are you hiring as well? What's the retention of these individuals? What are your sales as well? So I look holistically at all these records, again, over the past 2 to 5 years, depending on the client and their circumstances, to look at what it is and where we are. And that determines our benchmark. Again, if we're noticing that we're only hiring a certain type of people, then we know the benchmark there. We need to recruit in more diverse areas. So again, the issue is not we need more young people, we need more Black people. The issue is that you don't have diverse recruiting. So you can't reach different people if you're recruiting in the same area. So that's why we want to look at this so that we can make our goals more tangible and more strategic as well. And lastly, what I also encourage is a SWOT analysis. So yes, many of you guys have a SWOT analysis for your organization, and you even may have one for your department. I want to challenge you all to do a SWOT analysis for your DE&I or diversity or inclusion, whichever you focus on that area of your organization. And you really want to make sure you're partnering with those senior level individuals, so decision makers. And so you want to say, what are some of our strengths when it comes to diversity and inclusion? What are some of our weaknesses? Where are some areas that we really are weak in? And it could be, hey, strong, we've been around a long time. We have a great diverse customer base. Great. We have different demographics. We hit a lot of different countries. Weaknesses is that we don't really have a diverse sales team though. Then the opportunities, same thing for diversity inclusion. And then what are some threats to that as well? And then what I like to have people do is let's do about 2 or 3 in each of these buckets, because what we can do is we can holistically look at the SWOT analysis. Let's look at the records. Let's look at the surveys. Let's look at the focus group. Let's look at the continuum. Put all this stuff together and see what are our top 3 or so strategic goals for DE&I. You may realize that there are like 17 things that we need to work on as far as diversity. You cannot accomplish all 17 of them. Okay. You may be able to say, this is the 3 we can do this year. Maybe we can do these 3 next year. And you may even come up with a 5-year diversity strategic plan because you've done such a great job with your diversity audit. So don't feel overwhelmed because you come out with a lot of things. Don't feel discouraged if you come out with a lot of things. Don't feel discouraged if you only have 5 of them. The idea is to put together this information to come up with really good strategic goals that you're able to actually accomplish as well. So let's talk about setting these goals. So we've collected all of our data, we analyzed it, and now how do we set these organizational goals that we're trying to hit? When we look at our organizational goals, we typically have 4 different areas that we're trying to satisfy. And in that, we have our balanced scorecard. So every single one of your organizations, you should have a balanced scorecard. And depending on your department, you may actually function in just one of those 4 buckets and areas. And let's look at that. So we have our financial area, we have our internal business processes, we have our customer, and we have learning and growth. So your department, for example, you may say, well, all we do is everything that's applied to learning and growth. That's what you may think. See, the way that we're flipping this around for diversity and inclusion or any L&D soft skill type of training is we're now trying to satisfy that financial bucket and that customer bucket, where typically we may not actually fall into those buckets. So again, we're taking off that we want to do the right thing and how can we impact the bottom line? So that's where, again, you have these 17 different things. You pick those top 3. Where do those top 3 fall? Do they fall in learning and growth? Do they fall in business processes? Do they fall in financial? Do they fall in customer? One goal could maybe fall in a few buckets depending on how you write the goal as well. So overall, vision and strategy should be around diversity and inclusion. This is how we are able to hit our goal. It has to be aligned with your vision. So if you right now in your organization do not have any sort of vision or strategy for DE&I, I encourage you to go back to the drawing board and let's put that together. And when we do that, see which one of these 4 buckets it falls into as well. And you want to make sure, again, it's not overwhelming. Don't make it too hard. Don't make it seem like I have to do something that just sounds so out of the box, so I wow everyone, and then you fail because you don't accomplish it. Start simple and make sure it's a SMART goal. That's why we have attainable and realistic. You want to make sure that they are something that's attainable and is realistic for you to do within that year time period that you're trying to achieve as well. Also, start with the why. Every single initiative or program that you are doing should always be, why am I doing this? Why? And that why should always align with that strategic goal. So that's why I said, if it's not part of that strategic goal, go back to the drawing board. Make sure it's part of it. That why should be, I want to align with my strategic goal. I want to hit this goal. And then you go to the how. A lot of people jump to the how. We want to roll out training and sessions. Okay, but why? Well, I don't know. We should. Well, that's not a why. Why do you need to do it? The why is the business need. You figured out the why when you did the diversity audit. That's why you do the audit. And you don't have to do every single one of those steps in the diversity audit. You can say maybe the resources and time. I had one client that said, hey, based on timing and resources, we can only do 2 of these 4 or 5 that you have. That's fine. Let's start there. So don't feel like you have to do everything from a diversity continuum all the way to a SWOT analysis. You don't have to do all of that. It's great, but we know realistically that's not always possible. So let's look at some examples. I want to expand the multicultural market in Asia and South America. I want to increase our net promoter scores from the southern region of the business by 1.5 points. I want to recruit and retain a diverse workforce over the next 2 years. These are strategic goals that you want to try to set for your organization. You see, it talks nothing about, I want to have more women. It says nothing about, I want to have a whole bunch of young people. Diverse could be that, but you're only going to know what diversity means in your organization once you do the audit. Because for some organizations, diverse does not mean women. If you look at some areas of the medical field, for example, it's full of women. So that doesn't mean the same thing. So you have to identify, what does diverse mean for your organization? And again, you'll only know that once you do your audits as well. So let's look at very quickly why some of these programs fail. Because I'm sure we've all heard of diversity programs that failed, or maybe we felt like, hey, we rolled out this training, we rolled out this 1-day session and nothing really changed. Like I don't think anything changed. So let me give you some reasons why those diversity initiatives and programs may fail. The first thing is lack of planning. So you didn't plan. You just put together a program or initiative, didn't really plan anything, and said, we're going to roll this out. Lack of effective resources. We just talked about this. There are some organizations that have an abundance of money for diversity and inclusion initiatives, and there are some that do not. So do not try to set yourself up for failure by saying, we want to do all those areas of the diversity audit. Lakisha, you said that. You said it, we're going to do it. However, it's a 2-person team. Your group, your coalition, your employee resource group is only 6 people, and there's 10,000 people in the organization, and they gave you a very small budget. Well, realistically, you can't do all that. So you have a lack of effective resources. They're not aligned with a strategic goal. So again, we're doing that. We saw no change, no impact, because it had nothing to do with any of the goals that you were setting. And lastly, no bottom line. There's no bottom line. What's the ROI? What am I getting out of this? And if you are someone that's in a C-level suite or a decision maker, you know this, that you have to start seeing the bottom line. We know this. Once we get to a certain level and we are partnering with those high-level executives, they want to see some type of return on investment, some type of impact as well. So very quickly, I want to show you guys how you can measure the DNI initiatives. So I partner with an organization called the ROI Institute. Not sure if you guys are familiar with them, but I'm a master in ROI. I do a lot of work with them, and I use a lot of the methodology when it comes to the evaluation part of any of the initiatives I put together. So I want us to quickly look at how you can evaluate the impact of what you're trying to do with diversity. The first thing is evaluation planning, the why. I talked about this earlier. What is the why? Is it feasible? And how do you set those benchmarks? All of that should be done in the beginning. All of that's done when you do that diversity audit. We know this. We know why we're doing it. We know the benchmarks. We know the expectations. First level of that. It's on data collection. This is when if you have the initiative, if you've rolled it out, we want to know, how do people feel about it? What did they learn? Were any behaviors improved? Was any skills improved? Was there any improvement in my business? What was the impact of my business? Did I have a retention of a certain amount? Did I have an increase in market share? What was that? And then you will collect that data to figure out the ROI. So all of that data collection is super important, because again, it doesn't matter whether you are in HR processes or sales or anything like that. You have to have that data to show that whatever you're rolling out works. So this is where a lot of that work comes in, and a lot of companies say, hey, they skip over this. Well, how are you supposed to know if it worked if we're not collecting the data? So that's where this data collection part comes into play. And then we want to analyze this data. One of the best things about this methodology that I love is it asks us to isolate the impact of the program. Let me explain a little bit what that means. Let's say that you have a diversity initiative, and what you're deciding to do is have a more diverse recruiting and retaining initiative. And you decided to put something in place. Well, let's say that you train all your HR individuals on how to do more diverse recruiting. You did a training. Well, that training only had such a percentage of why you improved. The training was not 100% of why you improved your diversity recruiting, because you may have also hired an external consultant. You may have also put in posters and things like that. So that program was only so much of the success. And you want to evaluate that, because maybe that program was so impactful, you want to do it again. Or maybe it wasn't impactful at all, so you don't want to do it again. That's how we have to see what impact did this program or initiative have on what we're doing. And then you want to make sure, again, it's something that can be converted into monies. This is how you figured out that bottom line. This is how you figured out that money. What does it look like to retain 6 people in your organization? What does that look like financially for you? You have to be able to create that and turn that into monies as well. And then after you're able to do that, you're able to optimize the results. This is where you're able to share your success. This is where you're able to maybe get more monies and resources for other diversity initiatives. Let's say that you wanted to do 3 of them, and you did ROI methodology or even an impact study to say, this is how we improved. And so now you can get those resources. Now you're able to get more opportunities because you were able to show that it aligns with your business goals and it had a positive impact on your organization. Or if it didn't work, you can say, that didn't work, let's try something else. And very quickly, this is how we calculate the ROI. I can go all day about how to figure out the ROI and impact, but just for the sake of time, I'll just show you the mathematical equation. As you see, it's like 4th grade math, very simple stuff. This is how we can figure this out. You present this to your decision makers and you will make them extremely happy. So again, thank you all so much. Here's my information. Please visit our website. Here's my email address, and here's my cell phone number. If you just want to talk and text, here it is as well. And again, thank you all so much for joining me to learn about diversity, strategic goals, and benchmarking.
All right, Lakisha. Well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. A lot of good feedback in the comments, and there's